All right. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Five Nights at Freddy's Fazbear Fun Time Fest. We are back, and I'm really excited for this video because, again, this was another video that was recommended to me by you guys. We are trying to solve FNAF using one character by Unwithered Truth. So, first of all, I do appreciate you guys let me know down in the comments in the last week's video to recommend for me to go watch this video. And also, if you guys want to see future videos of me reacting to, simply let me know down in the comments of future videos you want to see. And potentially in a later FNAF Fun Time Fast Fest Friday, we may react to that at a future date. So appreciate the support. Also, subscribe, ring the notification bell because it also helps out the algorithm. But as always, before we get into this week's Five Nights at Freddy's video, we got the Witty banter section, and as always, I will be leaving down chapters in the video, so if you want to skip that and you don't want to listen to me ramble about random bullshit, you can skip to the reason why you clicked on the video. But the reason why we're talking about banter this week is I'm looking forward to the end of August because I'm going to a Comic-Con, which I'm very excited about. It's the first Comic-Con that I've ever been to because I just, growing up, I always viewed like anime and that kind of stuff as, weird. And it's the, type of stuff that sounds bad for me to say and ignorant for me to say, but like, oh, it's stuff that, nerds, were only focused on was like the anime stuff. That was just the culture I grew up in school. But nowadays, the last, 4 or 5 years, anime and gaming has kind of done like a full-on inverted 180 where, stuff before growing up where like anime and gaming was, seen as lame and only stuff that like nerds, took into. Now, anime is cool and gaming is cool and you do those things and now you're seen as cool, which is kind of bizarre if you really think about it. But I'm really looking forward to it. And not only am I going to Comic-Con in St. Louis at the end of the month, but also other things are happening as well at the end of the month. Seeing Dakota as well, which can't wait for that. He's the person that got me into anime, and that's the reason why I'm going to Comic-Con is going with him. And also cosplaying as well. Cannot wait for that. Not to spoil it, but the plan is to cosplay as MHA characters, so cannot wait for that as well. Also in St. Louis, there's talks of us going to Six Flags. I can't remember the exact name, but the Six Flags down in St. Louis. So there's a lot happening. Also, 2K27 is also coming out that weekend as well. So it's literally a jam-packed weekend. We're going to Comic-Con, Six Flags potentially. 2K is also coming out. Can't wait for it. It's going to be a very fun, impactful month. And maybe I bring back vlogging, which that's not something I've even said out of my mouth for several years. But who knows? Maybe I bring back vlogging because, again, there's just so much happening. So yeah, can't wait for it. But that is the end of this Witty banner section. But yeah, moral of the story short, I'm looking forward to going to my first ever Comic-Con in my life because, hey, I am no longer the crowd that thought anime is for lamos. Anime is very fucking cool, and it's awesome. So I can't wait for it to see what Comic-Con and what that whole scene's about.
Mean to be broken. What about this yellow bear gives it supernatural abilities greater than any other character we've seen in the FNAF franchise? And what does it have to do with this crying child? Today, I'm going to answer every one of these questions. In doing so, not only will we discover the truth to Golden Freddy, but we're finally going to put this broken timeline back together.
Toy Chica's missing her beak. That's very important. And the FNAF 2 game, and also the FNAF 4 minigame, but was noticeably absent in the FNAF 2 movie, which I was very disappointed about. God Victim. All right. I'm not sure if that's a follow-up to the video we reacted to last week talking about God David, talking about the FNAF 4 Crying Child being tied to David, and obviously the FNAF 4 Crying Child was shoved in the mouth of the Golden Fred Bear, and now it's God Victim. Let's see. Looking forward to it.
Back in 2015, following the middling reception of the third FNAF game, Scott Cawthon decided to come back one last time, haha.
Yep, I was about to say it one last time, because FNAF, if you don't know, if you go on the Steam page, FNAF's Ford's description is literally the end of the original story. And obviously, FNAF 4 wasn't going to be the end because Scott saw a little money printing machine, so he was never going to stop.
And wrap up the story in a big, neat bow with Five Nights at Freddy's 4, the final chapter. At this point in time, it seemed like we had a pretty tight understanding of the first three games, a purple phone guy and a few extra spirits notwithstanding, but suddenly we had a lot of new, erroneous details to figure out. There was a new dead kid, rumors of murders before Freddy's even opens, and an event that sure seems like the Bite of 87, given all those hints in the website teasers, but just can't be due to a handful of very crucial contradictions. It didn't take long for people to figure out that this game actually takes place in 1983 during the Fredbear's Family Diner era, but that only raises more questions. Why are there all these weird details from later in the timeline? Who is this kid dressed like the puppet but killed by Fredbear? Why is this plushie speaking to him? And why does it seem like this is Happiest Day all over again? And Scott was actually surprised that we didn't figure it out. I've come to realize that all of these unanswered questions are ultimately the result of us not understanding how Golden Freddy works. To figure that out, we have to first look backwards to the last time Scott ever directly tried to help the community solve these games. During a game theory livestream dedicated to solving FNAF 4, Scott began updating his website in real time to provide the community with 3 hints. These 3 very short, simple sentences would forever haunt FNAF discourse. You know these 3 hints.
In a FNAF 4 minigame, why would the tiny toy Chica be missing her beak? Well, seeing the shadows is easy missing the mind of a child in 4 games, 1 story. Now, looking at all 3 of those texts, I would say the first one is the easiest to decode because it's the one that is the most explicit. Is if you look at the minigame, you see the tiny toy Chica with the girl at the swing set, and you see a little, orange rectangle pixel. It's like 8 pixels, and that is supposed to symbolize Toy Chica's beak being on the ground. And that is supposed to reference FNAF 2, if you don't remember. Because in FNAF 2, if you look on the cameras of Toy Freddy, Toy Chica, and Toy Bonnie, they are all on stage looking as pretty and unkillable as ever. But then Toy Chica goes and going to you as the player, the night security guard, and Toy Chica has now had her beak absent. So that's what it's referencing. That's the one that's, the easiest to decode. That's the one where it's most explicit. The second one is where we get into the weeds. A little bit of trouble starts to brew. What is seen in the shadows is easy to mister in the mind of a child. And this is the linchpin that really kicked off the whole first 4 games being tied to Dream Theory. And the mindset of everything that we have played in FNAF 1, FNAF 2, FNAF 3, and close down FNAF 4, everything that we've been playing and talking about with, murders and phone guys and that type of stuff was all in the mind of a child following him being shoved in the mouth of the Fredbear and dying. So, again, the Toy Chica and the other toy characters we see with the girl on the swing set, that's supposed to reference the animatronics that we see in FNAF 2. In the FNAF 4 Crying Child's bedroom, you see 4 stuffed animal looking plushies of the original core 4 of Freddy, Foxy, Bonnie, and Chica. And that is supposed to symbolize the, more like fur texture animatronics of the FNAF 1 location. And the reason why Foxy's head was missing out of, those core four in the bedroom, that was supposed to symbolize Fotzi's pirate cove of constantly being, closed up, shuttered, and having a big out of order sign in front of it. That was supposed to symbolize that. The girl, pigtail girl, talking about, don't get caught because what will happen if they catch you. They, put you in this like animatronic suit and they never tell anybody. References like the phone call tapes talking about of how, this is what happens when you get caught by the animatronics. So not to lose power during 6 a.m. and all that stuff. But then that seems explicit. But then we get into some issues because in the FNAF 4 minigames, I want to say it's night 3. You're able to walk around the pizzeria as a FNAF 4 crying child, and some text shows up at the top of the screen from the Psychic Friend Fredbear Golden Freddy plushie. It talks about, oh, don't you remember what you saw? You know what will happen if he catches you. And we're like, this kid saw something. What did he see? And to this day, we still don't know what he saw. I've been in the camp of don't you remember what you saw? That was his sister being killed by the baby animatronic, and that is what made the FNAF 4 crying child scared, is he saw his sister die, so that's what made him scared, is seeing what happens when a child gets too close to one of the animatronics, they get scooped and killed. That's what he's afraid of. He doesn't want to get too close and suffer the same fate as his sister. That's why the girl's bedroom is empty, because the sister is already dead. That's why there's a big stomach teeth mouth on Fredbear in the FNAF 4 Nights. The stomach teeth mouth is supposed to symbolize the mouth, chest opening, so to speak. It's supposed to be metaphorical, not in a literal sense. But if you go back in the hallway when you hear, don't remember what you saw, what will happen if he catches you. If you go back in the original hallway that you entered in the pizzeria, where like the front door is, you see someone inside the Golden Freddy spring lock suit. And then you see the purple guy putting the head mask of the Fredbear on said person who's in the Golden Freddy spring lock suit. Now, what has confused people is that William Afton, the purple guy, putting the mask on an employee who is wearing the Golden Freddy suit in, costume mode as like a, attraction for the kids as a pizzeria as an employee, or is it the more sinister sense where he's stuffing one of his child victims inside the Freddy suit to be spring locked and for their body to never be found? That is something that people are still confused about, of the many things that people are confused about in FNAF 4 to this very day. And then 4 Games 1 Story, that seemed to symbolize dream theory. But then over the years, that has also taken on other meetings. At one point, in like the FNAF 6 Ultimate Custom Night era of games being released, I know the popular theory going out was it was supposed to symbolize the 4 Games 1 Story was supposed to be the story of the Aftons, the Afton family. And basically, it was a story of the Afton family one by one getting their comeuppance and dying at the hands of their ignorant and terrible father, William Afton. So, we're like, for instance, we're not really sure the story, the backstory, who William Afton's wife is, what her name is, if she has any relevance, We have no idea. The theory is that people like to assume that Clara, the wife from the Immoral and Restless TV show, sitcom, from the show that you watch in between nights in Sister Location, that is William Afton's wife. Her name is Clara. But again, it's a TV show that we see in between nights of Sister Location. It's never been outright confirmed. We know absolutely nothing. We just widely believed that in some regard, William Afton had a wife and she either left him and divorced him, or she died, or she left in some way. That's pretty much what we're going to get at there. We're going to leave it at that. She left in some way, and William Afton built Ballora in the likeness of his either divorced or now dead wife. Who knows? And that's why, for instance, Ballora is not only a very mature-looking, motherly, adult-looking character, that's one, but two, that's also why throughout all the games and appearances we see of Ballora, her eyes are shut, because that's supposed to symbolize, in William Afton's perspective and mind, in his own twisted mind, just like a twisted one animatronic. That was probably lame. I apologize for that joke. But anyways, her eyes are shut because in William Afton's perspective, his wife was shut and she was not seeing William Afton's like grief or his vision to be genius animatronic inventor, and also doubles as a serial killer, which, I mean, shocker. She doesn't see or agree with William Afton's life purpose of killing kids. Shocker. Believe it or not. But then you have other members of the Afton family. You have the FNAF Crying Child, the younger brother, who dies at the hands of, the older brother and the bully's friends. Shove it in the mouth of the Fredbear animatronic and getting bitten and killed on his birthday. The older brother, who we widely assume to be Michael Afton, has many forms of death, but he cannot die. And then you have Elizabeth Afton, the sister, who, like I said earlier, dies at the hands of Baby because she gets too close to an animatronic because she cannot contain her excitement. And then throughout the whole story, William Afton, not only, just like Michael Afton, has multiple times where he dies, but he comes back, but also it's a story of everyone else in his family is dying around him because of his own blissful ignorance. That was one interpretation of 4 Games, 1 Story, but then you have another interpretation of, no, it's not the Afton family, it's Michael Afton himself symbolizes the 4 Games, 1 Story, because Michael Afton, as a character, is going location to location, not only trying to undo his father's misdeeds, trying to lay the souls to rest of the kids that William Afton killed, but also Michael Afton is also trying to go location to location, trying to find his father, trying to see what is wrong with him. Why am I not dead when I should be? So, got all that? Cool. There's probably other explanations I'm forgetting about, but those are the ones that I remember as far as was seen in the shadows easily must on the mind of a child, and 4 Games, 1 Story having multiple different meanings.
But you probably aren't as familiar with the context in which they were sent. So I looked back at the moments leading up to each teaser.
Also, W MatPat, I miss MatPat. F and respects. Everyone say F and respects for MatPat. He's not dead, I just miss him.
And use that to analyze not only what Scott was saying, but why he was saying it. In the lead up to the first hint, MatPat and guest Alex were discussing the 1987 teaser codes and all of the seemingly random Easter eggs throughout the game.
Scott, since we know you're listening, it's also really hard to tell what is and isn't an Easter egg or clue, right?
That 87 business, it's like it was a red herring, I think.
Food for thought on this live stream or a future live.
God, Young Dako is crazy. God.
stream during the minigames in FNAF 4, why would the tiny toy Chica be missing her beak?
It's obvious that Scott wanted to clear something up about these 87 teasers. They're not red herrings as suggested here by Alex. If they were, why would the tiny toy Chica be missing her beak? It's clearly evoking the actual toy Chica from FNAF 2. The next teaser came pretty soon after the first, meaning that Scott most likely wanted the two to be considered alongside one another.
He said, what is seen in shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child. Silence.
From here, MatPat starts to develop a hypothesis.
This is weird, okay? But it's one of the things that immediately jumps to my mind. Is it possible that FNAF 2 didn't actually happen?
To which Scott very quickly replies,
Yeah, he said 4 games, 1 story. That's what he said on the website. 4 games, 1 story.
This final hint, in context, makes a lot more sense. It seems like Scott may have been trying to dispel the notion that FNAF 2 was a dream. However, MatPat actually took this as a hint that he wasn't going far enough, and led him to create his infamous Dream Theory video. That theory essentially proposes that Scott was retconning all 3 prior games to be fictitious hallucinations dreamt up in the dying mind of the crying child.
Which is what I said earlier. But yes, just recap. Synopsis summary. If you didn't want to hear me ramble for the last 15 minutes explaining those website sentences from Scott from years back, yeah, short summary of what I said.
Now, this theory has a lot of problems, but it fit neatly enough as an explanation that a lot of people still believe it was Scott's original intention with FNAF 4. However, today, I'm here to tell you that MatPat was actually kind of right. But only kind of. Stick with me here. See, MatPat got all the right pieces of evidence, arranged them all in the right way, but just didn't quite stick the landing with his conclusion. But hey, listen, I don't blame him. When I came to the conclusion I'm about to explain, I wasn't so sure either. But if you give me a chance, you'll see that this is almost certainly what Scott was trying to tell us with FNAF 4.
Not to spoil what this video does, but something I will, put up guardrails and do some pushback is I don't think it's fair if we do hindsight's 2020. We look at the FNAF 1 through 4 MatPat Dream Theory, and we basically turn around and say, oh, Dream Theory no longer fits if we look in the context of Custom Night or Security Breach or the FNAF VR games. That's not fair. Same token as if you look at those original early on Game Theory FNAF videos, Purple Guy was Phone Guy, and there was evidence from MatPat's series that said Purple Guy was Phone Guy. Obviously, that's wrong now. It's kind of a meme now, but I'm just saying, it's not fair to you. Hindsight's 2020 would be oh, years later, no longer fits. Yeah, of course it doesn't. Because FNAF has eras, has stages. The games from FNAF 1 through 4 and the storytelling and what they're about is totally different and not even in the same universe, it feels at times, than what we got in, let's just say, FNAF Ruin. Believe it or not, there was no glitching bunnies or AR networks to mind control you when we're talking about FNAF 2 toy animatronics, believe it or not.
The tiny toy Chica missing her beak is a clever detail for Scott to highlight because it brings to mind the other out-of-place connections to the rest of the franchise littered throughout this game. Now, the most obvious and important thing to note about these connections is that most of them line up suspiciously well with the Happiest Day minigames in FNAF 3. BB's air adventure connects to this kid on the street holding a balloon. Mangle's quest links to the broken toy in the sister's room. Chica's party is clearly called on by the tiny toy Chica missing its beak. And RWQ's minigame would be referenced by these shadows cast by Fredbear and Spring Bonnie. Not to mention Stage 01 clearly taking place in Fredbear's family diner. Now, I'm far from the first person to point these connections out, but it's important to note that Scott is connecting the crying child's memories of this week to the resolution of Happiest Day, which ends at a birthday party with 4 guests wearing animatronic masks. The final child, the birthday boy, receives a Fredbear mask once all the spirits are gathered there. So that's a pretty clean answer, right? Why is this stuff in FNAF 4? Well, it's to link it to the Golden Freddy kid in FNAF 3. Case closed. Except, obviously not, case back open. Because the issue isn't why these things are here, it's how. Almost all of these examples are in some way out of place chronologically, given that this game takes place years before a lot of it should be able to exist. And those connections to Happiest Day aren't the only weird Easter eggs in the game. Other future nods...
Let me think. If we're talking about timeline perspective, if FNAF 4 takes place in 1983, FNAF 3 takes place... Is it 30 years after the original closes down? Hold on. Hold on 1 second. Okay. Sorry for that looking awkward, but if you look right here, it says 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza closed its doors, the events that took place there have become nothing more than a rumored childhood memory, but the owners of Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction, are determined to revive the legend and make the experience as authentic as possible for patrons. Yeah. So FNAF 3, the Fazbear Fright horror attraction, that, remember, the horror attraction is designed to make fun of the spooky ghost stories where kids go, into a pizzeria, their bodies are never found, and supposedly their bodies possess the suits as ghosts. But that's all it is. It's like spooky ghost stories. It's a lot like how FNAF VR Help 1 and 1 pokes fun at Fazbear Entertainment at themselves for, again, the murders, quote-unquote murders, allegations. Allegedly, kids went missing and died. So that's what FNAF 3 is all about. So if it's 30 years after Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, which I'm assuming is the original, but again, this is an assumption. If I'm wrong, call me on my bullshit. But if it's 30 years after the original, so that means 1983 was FNAF 4. 30 years after that would be 2013. Yes. 2013 would be the timeline year of FNAF 3. Right? So 2013 would be FNAF 3. Yes? Hope so. All right. Hold on. Let me... Oops. Sorry. Now that we're done talking about that and showing off that, so I doubt that was worth it. Let me bring this back. Okay. Hope that looks good, and I hope that I didn't mess it up. All right.
Include this kid calling their Spring Bonnie toy a finger trap, which is an obvious nod to the purple guy's fate. Willie A himself is seen here rocking the same fit as we see in FNAF 2's Save Them. This Susie lookalike with the tiny toys is striking a withered Chica Scarecrow pose.
A Susie lookalike. Okay. Interesting. I mean... Is that a stretch? I mean, hey, I'm calling a spade. I mean, people were calling me out last week and saying, my interpretation of the poorly dubbed Japanese anime cutscenes from Ultimate Custom Night and how the bear is symbolizing Henry and the fox being William Afton and the mangle being Michael Afton. People are saying, I was going over the board, I was jumping the shark, I was, kind of stretching the bounds of possibility, which I think is bizarre because, hey, you have to think about what series we're talking about here, where you kind of have to stretch the walls of possibility in order to understand what this series is. Again, this is a series where time traveling ball pits exist. And the reason why you're able to time travel is the balls you jump into, do not take that out of context, but the balls you jump into have the blood and souls of previous William Afton victims. So when you jump into the ball pit, not only is that a huge sanitation hazard, but that's how you're able to time travel to 1985, is because the balls have the souls of the dead kids. So together, uniformly, they cause you to teleport back to 1985, when it was one of William Afton's first incidents of killing kids. There's also a series where you have someone like Fazgoo, where it's a gooey, gelatinous, gelatin-looking substance, where if it touches you, it sucks out your internal organs like a vacuum, and then after it's full, the goo forms into a full-on robotic clone, identical version of yourself that's near indistinguishable. And then it kills you and then takes your identity. Like, this is a series where that stuff happens and we just accept it. So, saying my interpretation was outside the realms of possibility and stretching and jumping the shark, it's like, think about what series talk about, ladies and gentlemen. But, getting back to the point, is this being Susie? I don't know. I don't know about that. I think her being in the Withered Chica pose from FNAF 2, her T-posing, I feel like that's a bit of a stretch. I feel like that's loose at best. I don't know about that one. I don't know about that. You know, like, I feel like that's a bit of a stretch, respectfully. Because if I'm not mistaken, isn't Susie also tied to her dog in the books? And that's what makes Susie die, is because her dog is dead. So I don't know about this. I don't know about that one. On the right, 100% that's Susie, but on the one on the left, I don't know about that one. That's a bold move, Connor. Let's see how it works out for him.
And this Foxy plush is as close to the teddy bear equivalent of out of order as you can get. And even still, there are more connections to future events, two in particular which we should analyze more closely. The first is what we hear from the pigtail girl outside Fredbear's 2 days before the crying child is bitten.
You better watch out. I hear they come to life at night, and if you die, they hide your body and never tell anyone.
The first, most literal interpretation of this dialogue would imply that the missing children's incident has already occurred, and that Fredbear's and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza are open simultaneously. However, this directly contradicts what we've been told about Fredbear's, that being it was a predecessor to Freddy's. In FNAF 3, Phone Guy refers to the Fredbear and Spring Bonnie animatronics as the classic suits, at the Freddy's where the MCI occurs, meaning that by the time of the missing children's incident, Fredbear's is long gone, and its star performers have been taken out of the spotlight and put into the new restaurant as side acts.
Yes, but also I'm trying to remember. In FNAF 3, since we're talking about the Springlock suits of Springlock, Golden Freddy, Fredbear, and Golden Bonnie, one of the FNAF 3 phone tapes talks about how you're not allowed to wear the Springlock suits anymore because of an unfortunate incident at a sister location where there were multiple simultaneous Springlock failures, deeming the suits unfit for employees and you're not allowed to wear them again. Now, either that means that multiple locations that had Springlock suits had failures at the same time, which I know I was on my tangent earlier of how this is a series where you kind of have to stretch reality of stuff just happens and you just have to accept it. But that's a little bit too much for me where multiple locations have failures at the same time. That's a little bit of a stretch. Or multiple suits at a location, at a sister location, had spring lock failures. To me, that is a bit more believable. And, well, it's also been well documented of spring lock failures of how, liquid, moisture, or even breathing are enough to trigger are enough to trigger the spring locks for you to be skewered from the inside out.
But then, what about all this Freddy's merchandise in FNAF 4? Checkmate.
Well, as seen on the TV later that same day, the Freddy's gang are actually cartoon characters who act as the supporting cast for Fredbear. In the security logbook on a page dedicated to rebrandings which occur whenever PR disaster strikes, Mike draws the bloody mouthed Fredbear as the mascot for the rebranded Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. On another page, which deals with exactly the same kind of PR complaints, Mike writes,
"He tripped and fell on Freddy's teeth. Not our fault."
all this is to say that the Freddy's brand is almost certainly the result of having to reorganize Fredbear.
Also, if we're talking about rebranding, something that just came to my mind while listening to that is I go back and think about Sister Location, where Sister Location was a chance for Fazbear Entertainment to revitalize themselves because, Phone Guy, the Go Annie Field, talked about, due to the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was clear that the stage was set, no pun intended, for a new contender in children's entertainment, that being Circus Baby's Pizza World. But talking about the PR stuff as well, that also connects to Circus Baby's Pizza World sister location, because it was open for one day and it was closed because of a quote-unquote gas leak. But the real answer of why it was closed is Elizabeth Afton died at the hands of the baby animatronic, and that's kind of a bad thing to, keep a business open, is the CEO, the owner of the business, their child dies to one of your attractions on day one. Probably not going to stay in business.
Bears after the big bite. Fazbear Entertainment quickly pulls those canned prototypes based off their
Sorry about that horrible noise. My knee hit the table.
popular cartoon mascots and makes them the non-reputation destroyed stars of the show. Most likely, these playground rumors of animatronics coming to life at night are actually just, playground rumors. Scary stories dreamt up by the kids to spook one another. With that being said, much like the mangle and the toy Chica missing her beak, this seems odd to be coincidentally true in the future, but baseless here in the past. And if you thought that was on the nose, we still have yet to mention the most glaring future forward reference in the entire game.
Was that the bite of 87?
Was that the bite of 87?
God, what a time to be alive.
I'm sorry, I just couldn't get through a FNAF 4 video without referencing this clip.
I mean, you have to. It's literally in the gospel. It's on the Rosetta Stone. When Moses parted the Red Sea, he asked, "Was that 87?"
In fairness, Mark's reaction here is understandable. To the average viewer, this is most certainly a good contender for the infamous bite we heard about back in FNAF 1, and Scott definitely knew that we'd think this.
I mean, yeah, obviously, when all the teaser images leading up to FNAF 4 was saying like, "Oh, wasn't me," referring to the biter, and you had all this other 1987 imagery. Believe it or not, when we get our hands on a game and we see an animatronic bite somebody, what did you expect the community to do other than connect the dots where it's like, oh, all this 87 teaser imagery of was it me, was I the biter in the bite of 87? And you get a scene in the game where an animatronic bites somebody. What'd you think was going to happen, Scott? What'd you think we were going to think? But it's also kind of bizarre that despite FNAF being around for 12 years, I think at this point, we still have no idea what happened in the Bite of 87. Who was the biter? What was the context? What happened? We still don't know anything. All we know about is the Bite of 87 happened, and then following the bite that caused the animatronics to no longer be able to free roam around the building, and be put on like lockdown mode where they're only tied to their stage like we see in FNAF 1. That's it. That's all we know about the Bite of 87 to this day.
As already discussed, Scott even teed up the 87 connections throughout the marketing, but like I said, I don't think that was just to mess with people. Scott likes to be cryptic, and sure, he has some rug-pulling reveals in his games, like FNAF 2 not being a sequel, or Springtrap turning out to be the purple guy. But this? I mean, sure, it's a twist if you look really deep into the minigames and find this one TV with 1983 on it, but what? The twist is there's actually 2 bites? Okay. It'd be a strange choice to include all this stuff just to turn around and say, gotcha, none of that meant anything. But again, as we've concluded, these weren't just random red herrings. So what does it all mean? And if it's not dream theory, how could I suggest that MatPack was still kinda correct? Well, he took all this time traveling imagery to mean that these future events couldn't have actually occurred, and that this game was the only one which takes place in reality. But what if I told you that those future events did occur precisely because of what we see in FNAF 4, or more accurately, because of what the crying child sees. Due to the unique circumstances surrounding his death, this boy's memories begin to affect reality itself. This theory will not only explain FNAF 4, but shows that when Scott wrote this game, he was playing 4D chess, simultaneously giving us the origins to the franchise and solving some of the biggest questions we had about the lore in one big fight.
I know I said this last week, but I'll say this again. W editing. I don't know if Withered Truth edits the videos himself or has a team, but regardless, W editing. Spam W's in the chat.
This might seem like a big pill to swallow, especially with such a grandiose T-Dreadsian title, but follow me and understand that there is a lot of textual evidence for this theory, not only in the games themselves, but scattered all throughout this multimedia franchise. So, to be clear, I'm suggesting that the real animatronic Toy Chica in the year 1987 removes her beak because CC saw this broken toy with the same malfunction. The Funtime Foxy animatronic is torn apart by kids that same year because CC saw a disassembled Foxy toy years earlier in his sister's room. Springtrap, Balloon Boy, the Shadows, everything MatPat used as dream theory evidence, we flip to become a future event influenced by the memory of the past. And again, the same 2 future connections which we highlighted before prove particularly interesting when viewed through this lens. This time though, let's discuss the Bite of 87 first. Given some clues we've received over the last few years, we have a fair understanding that Withered Foxy, or potentially Mangle, was actually the one to commit this second bite. However, I think Scott already gave us this answer in 2015. Under God Victim, the Bite of 87 would have been caused by the crying child's memory of his own injury, but the perpetrator would have been Foxy because, in his mind, that's who was actually at fault. Michael wearing the Foxy mask eventually gets warped by broken memories into Foxy causing the next bite in 1987. In the FNAF 4 teasers, there's even this image of Nightmare Foxy with the numbers 8 and 7 reflected in his eyes, showing us that this character witnessed the event firsthand.
Again, all that FNAF 4 87 imagery, and Scott wonders why FNAF 4 is so confusing and frustrating to this day.
Furthermore, we have the 1987 Easter egg in FNAF 1, where inputting that year into the custom night gets you jump scared by Golden Freddy, indicating his ghostly relationship with this event. The connections between the Bite, Foxy, and Fredbears are actually further cemented in external media, specifically the week before. Now, admittedly, the books are dubiously canon, even the interactive novels, but I think the connections here are interesting nonetheless. On Night 4 in Pirates Cove,
I mean, the books are canon, and to me, you know, this opens up another conversation can of worms of whether the books are canon or not. And I've said this time and time and time again, and I'm going to beat a dead horse, or in this case, a ghostly animatronic at this point, but my interpretation of whether books are canon, games are canon, which is more canon, my interpretation has always been book canon, book universe, game canon, game universe, all under the Five Nights at Freddy's IP umbrella. But they're separate universes, but just like a Venn diagram where you have a circle here, and then a middle circle in the middle, they share like-minded things. That's where we get into the actual timeline, the actual lore, the actual story is game canon, book canon, shared ideas. That's where you get into the actual story. Because there's several things that was book canon originally, but then turned into game canon. Biggest example being William Afton. William Afton was a character that was revealed to be the purple guy serial killer and also part owner of Freddy's before we got to Sister Location and FNAF 6. William Afton, as the purple guy, the killer, was already revealed in the books before we got to the games. Henry was a book character before we even got any mention of him in FNAF 6, potentially, but absolutely confirmed in Secret of the Mimic. Speaking of Secret of the Mimic, that was a story in the books with Edwin and David before we got the game. FNAF Into the Pit has been a book, has been a graphic novel, has been an interactive novel before we got to the game version, which, unrelated note, FNAF Into the Pit, phenomenal game and one of my favorite games in the entire FNAF catalog. Cassidy was a book character. Charlotte was a book character. Cassidy was a book character. Susie being mentioned was a book character before we got even more information about her in the FNAF 6 Fruity Maze minigame. You get the point. Long story short, if you think about any important character, I would say the only exception is Michael Afton. Every important character in this series has been important in the books prior to being important in the games. So that's one. And two, we're at this point where there's like triple or maybe quadruple at this point amount of books compared to games. So dismissing all the books because they're quote-unquote according to you not canon is not fair, because you're dismissing a huge hefty chunk of FNAF media because it's not canon to you. Right? Alright, cool.
You can receive a Fredbear's Family Diner ticket stained with blood, but we have to wonder why this would be here. Maybe to draw our attention to the link between Foxy and the Big Bite. I mean, in FNAF 3, the Foxy's Kid spirit is even directly linked to the Fredbear Stage 01 minigame. Now, for that other thing I think the Crying Child influenced. This will almost be certainly controversial, but allow me to lay it out as plainly and simply as I can. 3 days before he's bitten, the Crying Child is prompted by the Fredbear plush to remember what he saw. Only moments later, we can see the purple guy in his one and only appearance in this game lurking in a back room. In reality, William here is just helping an employee into their costume, but let's not forget that second, very important hint that Scott gave us on the GT livestream. What is seen in shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child. Given that there have been playground rumors going around of people going missing and animatronics coming to life at night, I think that CC misunderstood what was happening in that back room. What I'm suggesting is that
I brought this up. He believes that maybe it's a kid being stuffed.
William Afton was inspired to start stuffing kids in suits because CC thought that's what he saw his father doing in the back room. Don't get me wrong, I don't think William was just a totally nice guy who CC worked into becoming a murderer, but I think his method of disposal was almost certainly brought on by CC's memory. But the real question is why and how can CC do this? Well, I think it all has to do with how he died. For a long time now, I and many others have believed that the Crying Child's death, though preceded by a bite, is unique when compared to the bite of 87. That event resulted in the victim losing their frontal lobe, but the same can't coincidentally be true for another separate event. Clearly, CC had his head crushed and... Oh. Scott Cawthon said on Reddit that CC did lose his frontal lobe, and nobody took note because it was a reply to a joke post. Got it. Here we have confirmation from Scott that CC did in fact suffer the same fate as Jeremy in the Bite of 87. Now, I don't blame you if you're still not convinced. Maybe Scott was just goofing around and didn't think too hard about his reply. I thought exactly the same thing when I read it for the first time as well. But then, out of morbid curiosity, I went looking to see if anything could be learned about Golden Freddy if CC did in fact lose his frontal lobe. And I was shocked. In my research, I found several medical journals which listed the following as common complications for patients who have sustained damage to their frontal lobe. Minimal to substantial memory loss, difficulty organizing information temporally, mood swings, changes in social behavior and personality, loss of acute motor function, sometimes resulting in paralysis, difficulties with impulse control, and speech and language production. I wonder if we have any paralyzed character who acts erratically, suffers from memory problems, and only speaks in short, simple sentences. Look, I know this might seem like I've cherry-picked some symptoms that fit my conclusion, but look it up for yourself. There is so much research done about this, and there is a staggering number of sources which cite many, if not all of these, as results of frontal lobe damage. What I'm saying is that if I could find this stuff, you can be sure that Scott Cawthon would have been able to when writing FNAF 4.
God, that beautiful, handsome devil.
If you want more in-game evidence, we can look to FNAF World, a game explicitly said to act as the method by which the crying child is put back together. If we look at the map for FNAF World, it sort of looks like a human brain. Some people disagree that it's a brain at all, which, fair enough, it's pretty abstract, but humor me for a second. If we take a look at this dead zone in the top left, dusting fields, I think, given its position on this brain, it could potentially represent the crying child's broken mind, missing or at least having sustained damage to its frontal lobe. There's a sense that this part of the map may not have always been desolate. An old, run-down Ferris wheel looms over the entire area, and the shadow of a bear wearing a top hat dances on a tree stump long after his show has ended. This area in the modern FNAF landscape evokes strong notes of Fall Fest and Fredbear's Singin' Show. Even if these concepts were barely a twinkle in old Scott Cawthon's eye when he made FNAF World, the idea that this place once held importance and has since frozen over is interesting when comparing it to the crying child's condition. So, okay, CC loses.
Not only that, but to connect FNAF World and FNAF 3 and FNAF 4 even more, the pieces that you put together that FNAF World is talking about is you put the, 8-bit balloon boys into place. You raise up the cupcakes that you click on in FNAF 3, and the FNAF World closes by saying, the pieces are in place for you. Now it's up to you to go find them. And eventually, we do find those pieces in FNAF 3. That's why we double click on Balloon Boy. That's why we click on the Chica cupcakes. That's why we click on the little plush Shadow Bonnie on the desk. Because those are all us laying the dead kids' souls to rest. And it closes out with the Happy State minigame, where we, as a puppet, give cake to the last victim, the Golden Freddy victim, giving him cake because that was the victim where his birthday was tragically cut short because of this incident. I just want to refresh your memory on that as well.
Loses his frontal lobe and is hospitalized, surviving the event the same way that Jeremy did after the Bite of 87. But when he eventually does die, his broken mind becomes one with the field. Some of you probably don't know what that means, or you've heard the field memes and know it's tangentially related to Fazbear Frights, but don't really get the ins and outs. Now, I could try and explain the field to you, but I am far from the best read FNAF theorist when it comes to the books. Luckily, I know somebody who just made a 36-hour video discussing Fazbear Frights, and is probably the most knowledgeable member of the community when it comes to understanding how these books relate to external media. To explain the field and how it ties into God Victim, here is your FNAF world building and media literacy professor, Gibby from the Horror Homestead.
Hi, I'm Gibby. FNAF has a magic system, and no, I don't mean magic wands and mana. A magic system is the term used for the way any supernatural force works in a piece of media. In FNAF, there are explicit but undefined supernatural events, like posters changing on walls, Golden Freddy appearing and disappearing before your eyes, words flashing in front of your vision. In the FNAF universe, these supernatural occurrences can be quantified through a substance called remnant. Remnant is first
Alright, have your interpretation of remnant.
used by name in the games in FNAF 6, where it's explained that remnant is what leads to the creation of ulterior presence, or ghosts. The games do little to explain this further, but it is explained in the novels. In non-scientific terms, it's like the metal is haunted. It's more complicated than that, of course, but it's similar to the way that water conducts electricity. Remnant is the mixing of the tangible with the intangible, of memory with the present. The people and things that are lost, it makes them almost real again. Two things in the series have been shown to create remnant: agony and love. Areas and objects permeated with lots of memory increase the effectiveness of the magic. While Scott could have stopped there.
Okay, so I don't know if they're going to talk about it, but we have seen remnant at use before. And it's the Funtime animatronics from Sister Location. Because how the Funtime animatronics are powered up is remnant. And from my memory of how it works is the remnant was taken. So this is gonna sound complicated, but I'm like, you know what? It's FNAF. You come here for the complications, so I'm like, you know what? Screw it. So in the FNAF 3 minigames, when the purple guy was disassembling the Freddy, Foxy, Bonnie, Chica animatronics, what purple guy William Afton was doing, at least a theory out there of what he was doing, because again, this is all alleged, it's all believed, because again, nothing's confirmed in this series, is he was disassembling those animatronics because he was trying to harness the remnant, the dead kids' souls from the original Core 4. He then took that remnant of the dead kids' souls from the missing children's incident from the Core 4 and then injected it, transferred over to the Funtime animatronics, and that's how they got powered up. That is why in FNAF 6, when we bring in, Baby, who has the soul of Elizabeth Afton, Burn Trap, who has William Afton, their soul. That's why we bring someone like, Lefty, who has the Charlotte Puppet soul inside of them. And you have Molten Freddy, who is like, wait, why is Molten Freddy so important? Why is he important to be salvaged and lured to this one, bunker in FNAF 6, and they are also part of the fire to be burned? Like, why are they important? But then you remember, the Funtime animatronics had the souls, the remnant of the original Core 4 kids from the missing children's incident, and Molten Freddy is the remaining parts of Ennard after Baby was ejected from the tribe. It's the other half of Ennard. And remember, Ennard was made up of the Funtime animatronics. So essentially, it's a multiple separated, broken down piece of Molten Freddy, separated multiple times, is the souls of the missing children's incident. That is why we salvaged Molten Freddy. That is why he's important to be burned down like the rest of them in FNAF 6. They're not just a random character just to add to the roster.
With his explanation of FNAF magic, he goes one step further by actually explaining how this memory magic works. In the Fazbear Fright story Fetch, the main character, Greg, is interested in the 0-point field and attempts to gain control of its limitless power. The entire story focuses on the field. as does the story of the villainous Dr. Phineas Taggart in the Stitch Wraith epilogues. The thing is, the 0 point field is very real. Everything in the universe is made up of atoms, and atoms are made up of smaller components that we call quantum particles. The empty space between particles should have nothing in it, no energy, and yet, at temperatures of absolute zero, where energy should not be present, our tools still pick up energy readings. We call this the 0 point field. Everything I just said is real science, but what we're going to talk about now is not scientific, it's just plain fantasy. Quantum magic is the idea that by harnessing or controlling the 0 point field, you can manipulate reality in any way you see fit. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's what the Force in Star Wars is.
It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, it penetrates us, it binds the galaxy together.
These concepts
It's like the quantum realm from the MCU.
are written about in the book The Field by author Lynn McTaggart, which is almost certainly where Phineas Taggart gets his name from. She describes plenty of real-world experiments that seemingly prove the existence of quantum magic and the use of the 0 point field. She believes that our thoughts determine our reality, and thus you can manipulate the field by thinking really hard. Something Lynn discusses, which is based in the current scientific understanding of the human brain, is that memories are not stored in the brain like grooves on a record. Memories are stored all throughout the brain. Taking out a chunk of your frontal cortex does not remove your 9th birthday party. You just might have difficulty accessing that memory, but the memory itself isn't deleted. Quantum mysticism views the entire universe in a similar way. They believe the quality of everything exists everywhere. It's like a memory made present, which is the exact definition of remnant from Fazbear Frights. Lynn also argues that children have greater access to the field than adults. It's also said to be easier to access the field when in a state of unconsciousness, and this is because the ability to control the field is easiest when a sense of self is diminished and you're able to accept that you're one with the entire universe. The problem is, in states where the sense of self is diminished, like being asleep, your ability to use your intention to shape reality is also diminished. But there is one circumstance in which that's not the case. Investigators attempted to replicate the work of the Princeton Pear Lab using random event generators, but with one important twist. They had enlisted several patients with frontal lobe damage. The only person to have a greater than normal effect was a volunteer who had a damaged left frontal lobe. The volunteer's particular handicap could have given him a reduced sense of self, but a normal state of attention. So, in Lynn McTaggart's book, whom Scott names a main character after, it is directly stated that someone with frontal lobe damage has a greater effect on the 0 point field, children have a greater effect on the 0 point field, being asleep or in a coma gives you a greater effect on the 0 point field, and the 0 point field can ripple your thoughts into the universe to change reality to reflect your thoughts, and especially control machines. Remember, the field is just straight up canon in the Fazbear Frights continuity. And in that series, we are also told that agony collects around places and objects, which in turn increase the efficacy of Freddy Fazbear magic. Back to the Unwithered Truth to see where he could possibly be going with all of this.
Thanks, Gibby. Who knew Scott Cawthon imported his magic system from a pseudoscience self-help book from the 2000s? I'm kidding, the field is peak sci-fi fantasy. I would have done the same thing. Anyway, given what we now know about the field and agony, who might just fit the description of a child who lost their frontal lobe and endures torture day in and day out? Empowered by agony and driven by an inability to organize and ground his memories, the crying child's spirit accidentally begins to warp the world around him. Events from his past reoccur, and his childish misunderstandings of innocent things begin to take twisted shape in reality. Scott didn't give us a half-baked "it was all a dream" plot. He crafted an origin story for not only FNAF's most powerful entity, but the entirety of the game's key events up to that point. And what was that final Scott Games hint? 4 games, 1 story. Except I don't even think it ends there. As Gibby pointed out, the magic system of FNAF also makes it clear that places and objects imbued with agony can also affect the field, meaning that we might be dealing with more than just a god victim. We're dealing with the haunted grounds of Fredbear's itself.
so I doubt we'll be able to track anybody down.
Have you ever wondered why Fazbear wants to contact the owner of a restaurant from 2 locations ago? I certainly have, as have many other theorists over the years, but for a long time we just assumed it was Scott trying to lay the groundwork for sequels and prequels by dropping a lore-relevant name. However, if we consider the words original restaurant owner, could Scott have been trying to tell us that the FNAF 2 pizzeria was actually the revamped Fredbear's Family Diner? At the start of FNAF 2, the newspaper says that this is a vintage pizzeria given new life. Freddy's has only been around for 4 years at this point. It would be a real stretch to label it vintage. Fredbear's, however, seems to have been around since at least the early 70s, potentially even earlier than that, so I think the vintage description would certainly fit. We also have lines from the logbook which ask if the crying child's favorite ride was the carousel.
But the thing I call attention to is... Hold up. Let me actually rewind this clip.
Freddy's FNAF 2
I'm a terrible YouTuber, sorry.
Original restaurant owner. Could Scott have been trying to tell us that the FNAF 2 pizzeria was actually the revamped Fredbear's Family Diner? At the start of FNAF 2, the news...
I don't know about that because... So we have Fredbear's Family Diner, and then we have the FNAF 2 location in 1987, and then the FNAF 1 location takes place maybe like 1992, 1993, 1994, something along those lines. Then FNAF 3 takes place in like 2013. Right. FNAF 4 is 1983. But it's a Fredbear's Family Diner location. If I'm not mistaken, doesn't one of the FNAF 3 audio tapes talk about a, previous Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location, not a diner? Right? Doesn't it welcome you to a pizzeria location, not a diner location? So that would mean, because FNAF 2 was a prequel sequel where, despite it having a 2 in front of it, it came before FNAF 1. So at the time when FNAF 2 came out, we thought that it was the grand reopening following the FNAF 1 location, but it's not. FNAF 2 came before FNAF 1. So what was FNAF 2 reopening then, if it came before FNAF 1? So that means there was a pizzeria location before FNAF 2, right? And the movie touched on this as well, of how there's the FNAF 2 location, but then there's also the original pizzeria location that came before that. And people believe that 1985 is that location, not only in a game timeline, but also movie timeline as well, where 1985 is where the Into the Pit incident happened. So you have Fredbear's Family Diner, and then you have the 1985 location pizzeria from Into the Pit, and then 1987 is the grand reopening of a pizzeria in 1987 in FNAF 2. Because, as a recap, 1983 would be Fredbear's Family Diner, right? That's why there's the Golden Freddy and Golden Bonnie Springlock animatronics. There's no one else. It will be a diner location, but it's a pizzeria location that the one had to been before, because how are we doing a grand reopening then? It would just be grand opening if this was the first pizzeria location, but it's not. So that's why I believe 1985 Into the Pit came before FNAF 2's 1987 location. Got all that? Probably not, and I apologize if that made that way more confusing than it had to be.
Newspaper says that this is a vintage pizzeria given new life. Freddy's has only been around for 4 years at this point. It would be a real stretch to label it vintage. Fredbear's, however, seems to have been around since at least the early 70s, potentially even earlier than that, so I think the vintage description would
Fredbear's Saint Show would give way to it taking place in the 40s, because a lot of like the, Disney, like Steamboat Willie, black and white cartoons and the original Mickey Mouse have that like black and white art style like this in like the 40s.
the early 70s, potentially even earlier than that, so I think the vintage description would certainly fit. We also have lines from the logbook which ask if the crying child's favourite ride was the carousel, a feature only shown in the FNAF 2 location up to that point. It even features the classic characters who should be obsolete by the opening of the 87 location, but seem to be heavily promoted at Fredbear's. If the FNAF 2 location is Fredbear's, it would finally make sense why the majority of these connections would tie into FNAF 2 specifically. This plot of land is where the crying child endured the worst days of his life, leading directly to the event which is repeated 4 years later. So, is this any better than Dream Theory? Am I suggesting that under God Victim, all agency is removed from the story? Well, no. See, God Victim may account for some of the finer details of the story, individual events or quirks of the series which Scott can paint with a more intentional brush, but that doesn't mean we lose our characters' agency. In Fazbear Frights, the characters are perhaps pushed in certain directions by the field's influence, but they can still act of their own accord 90% of the time. God Victim, in my opinion, is probably the cleanest explanation for FNAF 4 that we have, given that it ties not only into all the hints and Easter eggs in that game, but also lines up very nicely with what we know about the field and Agony from later entries in the franchise. If you're not a fan, fair enough, but I'd ask you to try re-examining the series from this angle and see if there might be any big, glaring things that I could have missed, anything I might not have mentioned.
Cassidy. Oh boy.
The reason I've avoided discussing this character in this video is because T-Dreads and I came up with a very interesting and kind of out there take on who exactly Cassidy might be. However, I don't want to pack this video with too many out there takes because I want God Victim to be able to stand on its own 2 feet. For that reason, I'm going to make my Cassidy video and release it soon as a follow-up to this one. As a sort of disclaimer to put at the end of this video, while all the conclusions you heard in this video were reached independently by myself with the help of theorists like T-Dreads and Gibby Horror Homestead, another very similar theory, known as Memory Victim, predates this video by quite a bit. While the Reddit account which created the post has since been deleted, I want everyone to know that this post exists. When we originally started coming up with this theory, we were just not aware of Memory Victim whatsoever, and so the name God Victim took a life of its own, and now that's just what we call it. There's also this video by Cyresquawks which was uploaded while I was making this video. It's really cool and discusses a lot of similar evidence to this video, but he reaches slightly different conclusions, which is great because it's important that we get as many eyes and minds on this stuff as possible. It seems that as a community we are finally ready to look at FNAF 4 in a new way, which might just get us closer to solving some of the greatest mysteries in the franchise. Anyway, make sure you're
Absolute W. And look, as we are wrapping up here, I will say this time and time again. Any video that tries to explain the complicated nature and the Elden Ring beast that is FNAF 4, I have to applaud you. Like, any video out there that tries to solve FNAF 4, I have to applaud you, because that is an undertaking that I would not give on my worst enemy, because of what does FNAF 4 mean? Is it Dream Theory? Do we play as the FNAF 4 Crying Child of the Nights? And this is like him, in the coma, trying to deal with the trauma. Are we playing as Michael Afton? This is all like some, hallucinogenic gas, night chamber where William Afton is underneath this dislocation bunker and using cameras to observe what happens when you lock someone in a room with, spooky animatronics with, by the sound illusion discs, and they see what happens with like fear responses. Like, what is FNAF 4 all about? So any video that tries to explain it, I have to applaud you, because despite it being a decade old, and I feel like we have a lot of answers to this series by now, I think we've gotten pretty good at talking about this series and trying to find Easter eggs and trying to find what a story means. FNAF 4 is still something that just sticks out like a sore thumb. So great video overall. And I guess that may potentially be a good segue into what we react to next week, talking about the Cassidy video. But as always, like I said in the very beginning of the video, let me know if you have any suggestions or any videos I should also react to, because I appreciate the ideas, I appreciate the support, I appreciate the feedback, and also let me know in the comments of stuff you agree with what I said or you vehemently disagree with, because, you know, I feel like at the end of the day, we are all trying to come together and we're all trying to have, you know, personal canon and personal theories of what FNAF is all about. And I feel like the more eyes, the more perspectives of people sharing their perspectives and viewpoints and what they view as canon or not canon, or they agree with this or disagree with this theory. Because again, they're all theories at the end of the day. I feel like the more eyes, the more people that share their opinions, the better. Because at the end of the day, talking about FNAF, talking about spooky ghost animatronics on a weekly basis is fun, and I personally enjoy it, and I wouldn't want to do anything else in the world. And I personally enjoy talking about FNAF, so I'm gonna take off talking about it, and I just enjoy it, and hope you guys too. So yeah, other than that, I hope you guys enjoy the video. I'll see you guys next week talking about more spooky animatronic horror.